Today I'm going to be showing you how to crochet a corner to corner moss stitch scarf. It's fully customizable. You can make this as wide or as long as you like. You can use literally any yarn you so wish. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to crochet the scarf itself and how to add tassels at the very end for that finishing touch. All right, let's leap straight on in. So when it comes to the corner to corner moss stitch, it can work up to be quite dense. So I tend to advise going up a hook size from your recommended hook size on the ball band of your yarn. For these first few rows as well, it might be handy just to have a stitch marker because it can be a little bit befuddling right in the beginning, but trust the process, it gets much easier as we get going. So leaving a nice long tail that we can incorporate into our tassels at the end of the scarf, pop a slip knot onto your hook. Now chain 3, 1, 2, 3. And we're going to work a single crochet into that very first chain. Now you can work into whichever part of the chain you find most comfortable. I'm going to work mine into this back bump purely because I find that that helps me spot these skipped chains a little bit easier. So into that very first chain you made, we're going to work one single crochet. Now before we go any further, grab a stitch marker and we're going to mark the gap in between your single crochet. So you have two legs of the single crochet here. And then we have these skipped chains. So if I pull that apart slightly, so that is all my single crochet here. It's a little bit tricky to see, but there's my single crochet, the top of the single crochet. And then we have this tiny little gap here by these skipped chains. So single crochet, tiny gap, skipped chains. Pop a stitch marker into that tiny gap. So you can see this is the top of my single crochet. This is the top of one of those skipped chains, and I've marked that little tiny space in between the two. We're not going to need a stitch marker for every row, but just for this first one, I find it super handy. So for row 2, we're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and then turn our work. Now into this tiny little chain space, so your skipped chains and your single crochet, into there we are going to work an increase. Now an increase is single crochet, chain 1, and single crochet back into that same chain space. It looks a mess now, trust the process. Chain 3, 1, 2, 3. Try to keep your yarn on your hook. Turn your work. And now we're going to be working the moss stitch. And for the moss stitch, we work into the chain 1 space that falls in between your single crochets from the row below. So we have our increase here. So you just made single crochet, chain 1, single crochet. It can be a little bit tricky to spot, but these two loops here, that's the bottom of one single crochet, and these two loops here are the bottom of the second single crochet. And in between them, if you pull those apart ever so gently, there is a tiny chain 1 gap. You spot it just there? This is the chain 1 space in between your 2 single crochets from the row below. So into that chain 1 space, we're going to work a single crochet, then chain 1. Now the next space we have in this third row is your turning chain space, so the chain 3s from the row below. Into that end chain space, we're going to work an increase, and an increase is single crochet, chain 1, single crochet back into that same spot. For row 4, trust the process, it gets easier, I promise. We're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3, turn our work, find that very first chain 1 space. Now that very first chain 1 space is in the increase that we just made. So in between these 2 single crochets that are sitting quite tightly together. Into that chain 1 space, we're going to pop a single crochet. Now the other thing to watch for is that you're not splitting your stitches on the front. So my hook has neatly come through the chain 1 space, and I know it's okay because here are the 2 loops from 1 single crochet and the 2 loops from another single crochet. What you want to watch is that you don't accidentally come through and catch one of the legs, accidentally splitting that second single crochet. So just be a little bit careful and make sure you are coming through the chain 1 space only. So I'm going to work my single crochet into that chain 1 space of the increase. Then chain 1, find the next chain 1 space. It's much easier to find. It's in between these slightly more spaced out single crochets, and work a single crochet. Chain 1 again. And now the last remaining space we have is this end turning chain. And into this chain 3 gap, we're going to work an increase. So single crochet, chain 1, single crochet into that exact same spot. Now again, chain 3, 1, 2, 3, turn your work. Find the very first chain 1 space. It is in between these 2 tightly packed together single crochets here. So it's in the increase, and into that little tiny chain 1 space, work a single crochet. Then chain 1, single crochet into the next chain 1 space, chain 1, single crochet into the next chain 1 space, chain 1, and then the very last space we have is this slightly larger chain 3 turning chain space at the end here. Into this very last chain space, we work an increase. So single crochet, chain 1, single crochet. This is how we get the width of our scarf. So this short edge here, where your tail is from your initial slip knot, we're working along until we have the scarf as wide as you would like it to be. So we're going to repeat this last row over and over until you have the width of the scarf that you want. So we chain 3, turn, work a single crochet into that very first chain 1 space. This is the one that's really easy to miss. Into that first chain 1 space, so in between your increase, work a single crochet. Be careful not to split the legs of your stitches on the other side. Then we work chain 1, single crochet into the next chain 1 space, chain 1, single crochet into the next chain 1 space, and we keep doing this, chain 1, single crochet into the next chain 1 space until you have run out of chain 1 spaces to work into, and all you have left is this end larger chain space. So chain 1, and into that end space we work an increase, which is a single crochet, chain 1, single crochet. Keep working that last row until your scarf is the width that you want it to be. Once your scarf is the width that you want it to be, so this is as wide as you want to take your scarf, now we're going to work on the length of the scarf. So how we do that is we will be increasing on one side, but not increasing on the other. So instead of going triangular, we're now going to bring it rectangular. That sounds way more complicated than it is. It's quite simple. We have one setup row to work before we begin the 2-row repeat for this middle section. And the middle section is working on the length without adding any more width. So your setup row, we have one row to work that is slightly different to all the others. So we're going to chain 3, just as you have been, 1, 2, 3, turn your work, and just as you have been, we're going to work your first single crochet in between those 2 single crochets, chain 1 space of your increase, and work your chain 1, single crochet, chain 1, single crochet, all the way down, working into your chain 1 spaces. Just the same as the row that you have been repeating over and over to get to the right width. We're just going to change how we finish this row so it sets you up nicely for going rectangular. So I'm working my way down, and just as before, you work your last single crochet into that last chain 1 space, and all you're left with is this larger end space where we've been increasing. Now, because we don't want to increase on one side, we're going to change how we end this setup row. So chain 1, if you haven't already, into this chain 3 space at the end of the row, we're not going to work an increase. Instead, we're going to work just 2 single crochets with no chain in between them. So 1 single crochet, do not chain 1, and just work a second single crochet. That is our setup row. So now we're ready to do a 2-row repeat to get this bad boy from being a triangle to a nice long rectangle. So for this middle section, it is a 2-row repeat. Now we're not increasing anymore on this side, but we will still be increasing over on this other side. So we're going to form a slightly shorter edge, which will be your decrease side, and then you'll keep this longer edge, which will be your increase side. It's formed over 2 rows, and the first row, so we're on the decrease side, we're going to chain 2, 1, 2, and then turn your work. Now we're going to skip these 2 single crochets entirely. There is no chain 1 space in between them, so we need to find the very first chain 1 space, which involves missing these entirely. So we're going to skip over these 2 single crochet that you just formed, find that first chain 1 space, and work a single crochet into that. Now, if you want to mark this chain 2 space with a stitch marker, this will just remind you that this is your decrease side. I'm just going to pop a stitch marker in there, and I'm just going to leave it in there. So I'll know this is my decrease, the short side. Now we're going to work our moss stitch as normal. So chain 1, single crochet into the next chain 1 space, chain 1, single crochet into the next chain 1 space, and we're going to work this all the way up . So I've just worked a single crochet into this last chain 1 space, and because this is the increase side, we're not going to change how we end this row compared to these other rows. So just as before, you're going to chain 1 and into this end chain space, this larger one, we're going to work an increase. So single crochet, chain 1, single crochet. Now the second row of this 2-row repeat, again, nice and simple. We start how we started all these other increase rows. We're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3, turn our work, find the first chain 1 space, which will be, because we're on an increase side, in between these 2 single crochets of your increase that you just made. Work your first single crochet into that first chain 1 space, chain 1, single crochet into the next chain 1 space. I'm going to work this all the way along. Now, as you approach your decrease side, so the side where we have this stitch marker, you'll have a chain 2 space right at the very end and your chain 1 space in between these last 2 single crochets. So I've stopped one before. I'm going to chain 1 and work my single crochet into that last chain 1 space. Now this is where the decrease side alters. Do not chain, and into this chain 2 at the end, just work 1 single crochet. No chain in between them. So on the decrease side, we do not chain 1 in between these last 2 single crochets. On the increase side, we do. On the decrease side, we do not. Now, because my stitch marker is quite noisy when it bangs along the table, I'm going to switch it out for a little scrap of yarn, so we don't have to listen to this infuriating noise. So I've just got a little tiny scrap of yarn, and I'm just going to tie it in so I know this is my decrease side. So we're going to be repeating those last 2 rows. We're going to recap them, so don't worry. When you're on the decrease side, chain 2, 1, 2, and turn. Now, because we work the moss stitch into the chain 1 spaces, there is no chain 1 space in between these 2 single crochets on the decrease side. So we skip over those entirely and work your single crochet into the very first chain 1 space. So chain 2, skip your 2 single crochets and work your single crochet into the first chain 1 space. Then working along, chain 1, single crochet, chain 1, single crochet into your chain 1 spaces from the row below, all the way along. Then, once you have worked your last single crochet into the last chain 1 space, we are on the increase side. So we're going to chain 1 and work an increase, being single crochet, chain 1, single crochet into that last chain space. Now the second row, for working back down again, we're on the increase side. So we continue as you did for all these other increase rows. We're going to chain 3, turn, find the first chain 1 space, which is in between your increase. We're on the increase side. There will be a chain 1 in between these 2 single crochets. So work your first single crochet into that first chain 1 space, and then we're going to work down towards the decrease. So we're going to chain 1, single crochet to all the chain 1 spaces, working all the way across, And as you approach this decrease side, you'll have a chain 1 space and a chain 2 space right at the very end here. So I'm going to chain 1, I'm going to work my single crochet into that last chain 1 space, and because we're on the decrease side, do not chain and just work 1 single crochet into this end chain 2 space. So we're going to continue to work these 2 rows back and forth to create the length. When we're on the short decrease side, chain 2, turn, skip those first 2 single crochets because there is no chain 1 in between them, and into the very first chain 1 space, skipping over those, is where we work our single crochet chain 1 combination. I'm going to work all the way up, and because we are on an increase side, chain 1 if you haven't already, and into the end chain space we work an increase, so single crochet, chain 1, single crochet, then chain 3, turn, work a single crochet into the first chain 1 space, which because we're on the increase side will be in that increase and we work the single crochet, chain 1, moss stitch all the way back down. Once you have just your 1 chain 1 space and the chain 2 at the end, you're going to chain 1 if you haven't already, work a single crochet into that last chain 1 space. Do not chain, and into the chain 2 space just work 1 more single crochet. So you can see we're keeping the decrease side short and the increase is growing the length. So we're going in this direction now in a nice rectangular fashion. So you're going to work those 2 rows back and forth until your scarf is the length that you want it to be. So go ahead, keep working those 2 rows until you have the correct length. Now you'll be working these 2 rows over and over. So once you have the right length, you should end on this decrease short side. If you find that the length that you want and you've ended on an increase side, just work your way back down to this decrease side. So you want to end your final length on this shorter side. I'm going to work a couple more rows and then I will show you how to bring it back in again. Your scarf is the length that you want it to be, and now we're going to bring this back in. So we're ready to start decreasing back down again. We've ended on the short decrease side. Now from this point on, it's a nice easy 1 row repeat. So we're going to chain 2, turn, and just as we've been doing all along this decrease side, we're going to skip these first 2 single crochet stitches. There is no chain 1 space in between these 2 stitches, so we skip them entirely, find the first chain 1 space and work our single crochet into that one. Then we're going to work our moss stitch, so the single crochet, chain 1 all the way up, and now as we reach this increase side, we no longer want to be increasing because now we're going to have both sides being a decrease side. So into this last chain 1 space, work a single crochet, but do not chain 1. Instead, into this chain 3, space at the end here where we were doing our increases. We're just going to work 1 single crochet. So now we're going to repeat this decrease row over and over. Chain 2, turn your work, find the first chain 1 space. Now we've just worked 2 single crochets with no chain in between, so skip these first 2 stitches entirely and into the chain 1 space, work your single crochet, and then we're going to chain 1 single crochet all the way down. As we approach this decrease side, we work 1 single crochet into that last chain 1 space. Do not chain and work a single crochet into this chain 2 turning space. Chain 2 and turn. Skip those first 2 single crochet and work a single crochet into that very first chain 1 space. Then chain 1, single crochet all the way back up. Once you reach this other side, we have a chain 1 space and a chain 2 space remaining. Work a single crochet into that last chain 1 space. Do not chain, and into the chain 2 space, work a single crochet. So we're going to keep repeating this row until we have just 2 single crochet stitches remaining. We're decreasing each time, so our stitches will go down in number. It gets much quicker as we do this final little section. You can see we're now coming in and we're decreasing. So we're going to chain 2, turn, find the first chain 1 space, which will be after those 2 single crochet because there's no chain in between those, and work your single crochet, chain 1, single crochet, once you reach your last chain 1 space before that chain 2, work a single crochet. Do not chain. I can't stress this enough. Do not chain, and work a single crochet into that chain 2 spot. Chain 2, turn, skip those 2 single crochets without the chain 1 space in between them, and into the first chain 1 space, work your single crochet. Then chain 1, single crochet. This is the row we're just repeating back and forth until you have just 2 single crochets remaining. So we're always going to end with a single crochet into that chain 1 space. Do not chain, and work a single crochet into the chain 2 space. Then chain 2, turn, repeat. So I have worked my way all the way down until I have just 2 single crochet in that last row. So I have my chain 2 turn, and then I worked a single crochet into the chain 1 space, and then a single crochet into the chain 2 space. Because there was no other spaces to work into, I've decreased right down. You'll have 2 single crochet and your chain 2 remaining. For the very last row, we're going to chain 1, turn our work, skip these 2 single crochet because there is no chain 1 in between them, and into the chain 2 space work 1 single crochet only. That is the very last stitch of your corner to corner moss stitch rectangular scarf. Now to finish off, we're going to chain 1 and leave a nice long tail, which we will incorporate into the fringing. Cut it off, pull that all the way through and pull it tight. So you should now have a long rectangle. So your scarf, the main body of the scarf, is complete. All we need to do now is add the fun fringing on the ends. With some yarn, you want to roughly eyeball how long you would like your fringing to be. Now always add a couple of extra centimeters for trimming it neat and obviously bundling it together, but just roughly, if that's the sort of length that you would like your fringing to be, pull out that length of yarn. Then you want to double it. Then you can cut that first strand. So you want a piece of yarn that is roughly double the length that you want your fringing to be. Now, as to how many of these strands you put in per little fringing tassel is entirely up to you. I tend to go for 3 per little tassel. So you can see it gives me 6 strands in total. That's with 3 of these double lengths. So I use my first cut as a guide to trim my other ones. So I'm just going to keep pulling out lengths of yarn. Once you've cut several of these pieces, take 3 of them, or however many that you would like, and loop them over your finger. Now with your crochet hook, we have these nice little easy to spot gaps along this short edge, and this is where I worked my fringing into. So coming from the back to the front, I'm just going to pop my hook through one of those nice little sections. I'm going to put my folded yarn over and draw it through. Then I'm going to pass these ends through this loop and tighten it up. Easy peasy. Now with your tail, you'll do this at both ends. This is my tail from my slip knot. This is my tail from that chain 1 where I just cut my yarn. I incorporate these into my tassels too. So just as we did for this one, I bring 3 pieces of yarn, loop them over my finger, go into that little space where your tail is coming from. Actually, I might just go into the space above, wherever you want. Doesn't need to be perfect. I'm going to loop these through just as before. And then when I feed my tails through that loop, I also drop the tail from my work through that loop too. So it gets caught within that knot as I pull it tight. So your tail is now incorporated into the fringing as well. You can add as many or as few of these little fringing as you like. We're going to do the same top and bottom. Just grab 3 strands of yarn or however many you wish. Hook in, loop them over, pull them through, and then feed these tail ends through that loop and pull it tight. Once you have added fringing all the way along to your personal preference, you can then smooth them out and you can trim them nice and neatly so they are all the same length. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope that you do go on to make one of these really fun corner to corner moss stitch scarves for yourself. This works particularly great with variegated yarns, as you can see, but looks equally fantastic in plain solid colored yarns, whatever you want to use, any yarn weight, any thickness, any color. This stitch works for it all. So until next time, happy crocheting!